Hello, I'm David Stephen Cohen. The following is the remake of a talk I posted on YouTube in 2021 titled How the Cult of Assessment Has Relegated the Teaching of History to the Dustbin, a New Jersey Example. As a former college professor having taught history and American studies at Rutgers University in Newark, like many of my colleagues, I had little interest in how history was being taught in the schools. Under publish or perish to obtain tenure, there was little incentive to concentrate on teaching as opposed to research and publication. I left academia in 1979 to begin working for the New Jersey Historical Commission, a public history agency which was then under the Department of Education in Trenton. It was a time of what was euphemistically called retrenchment, and many of us with PhDs had to find jobs in the public sector, working for museums, historical societies, foundations, etc. I was able to obtain funding for a folklife program at the New Jersey Historical Commission from the National Endowment for the Arts. While some may have said I was overqualified for the job, I was able to make the job into what I wanted it to be, providing I was able to obtain funding for my projects. While at Rutgers, I was a consultant on a television documentary about Hispanics in New Jersey, produced by Lou Presti, at the now defunct New Jersey Network. I was able to get a grant to produce with Lou a folklife film titled In the Barnegat Bay Tradition about New Jersey duck decoys and a regional boat type known as a sneak box used in duck hunting. It won a regional Emmy, and from then on I was able to work with Lou on any project for which I could obtain funding. When the folklife program at the New Jersey Historical Commission ended, I began to work on ethnic history and media-related projects. The most ambitious of them was a 10-part series of half-hour programs about the history of New Jersey for use in the high schools. New Jersey had a law that, in effect, required the teaching of New Jersey history as part of the required 2-year course in American history in the public high schools. However, it was common knowledge that the law was widely disregarded. I later found out that there were several reasons for this. First, few, if any, New Jersey social studies teachers had ever taken a course in New Jersey history. It was not a requirement for the major in social studies education in most New Jersey colleges, each of which set its own requirements for the major in their schools of education. A teacher could be certified to teach social studies in the high school as well as in many other states, and therefore would teach U.S. history or European history or world history without having been a history major in college. It was sufficient to have taken courses in political science, economics, or geography. So most New Jersey social studies had no training in New Jersey history, and some had little training in American history. There was no state requirement that the middle or high school teachers take either an American history or a New Jersey history course in order to be certified to teach social studies in New Jersey. In fact, middle school teachers needed only to major in elementary education to be certified to teach social studies courses. As a result, the Governor's Task Force on New Jersey History in 1997 found that 81% of the teachers who responded to its inquiry claimed that they had never taken a New Jersey history course. The result has been a crisis in the teaching of both American history and state history, especially in the middle and high schools. The Task Force on New Jersey History commissioned the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers University to administer a test to 371 students in 6 school districts, both in northern, central, and the southern parts of the state, including public and private urban and suburban schools. A shocking 70% of the students who took the test didn't know that the Battle of Monmouth was fought in the 18th century. My idea for what became the New Jersey Legacy television series was to integrate state history into the teaching of American history. My premise was by showing how national themes played out on the state level, it would make history more real to students. We would go to places where significant historical events took place. We would take historians who had written about New Jersey history to talk on location about those events and people of importance in the history of New Jersey. While there would be some narration to make transitions from topic to topic, the idea was to show that there was not one single interpretation of history, but many, sometimes contradictory interpretations by different historians. There would be voiceovers of readings from eyewitness accounts. Maps and other visuals would date from the period being covered. There would also be teacher guides with primary source documents and questions to help students analyze these documents. This approach came from my training in historical methods in graduate school and experience of 9 years teaching history at Rutgers University. Initially, problem was obtaining funding for the series. Because it was a state history project, funding from national sources such as the National Endowment for the Humanities was out of the question. What I discovered was that even though New Jersey was one of the wealthiest per capita state in the country, the business community in New Jersey was reluctant to fund a history documentary series. New Jersey had and continues to have a self-image problem. Stereotypes and jokes were made about a state by people who had only seen it by driving through industrial sections of New Jersey on the New Jersey Turnpike, and television programs like The Sopranos and New Jersey Shore peddled a stereotype across the nation and abroad. Nevertheless, it was a hard sell to convince possible funding sources that a television series would help correct these stereotypes, at least in the minds of New Jerseyans who themselves bought into them. I thought that the reason the business community was distrustful of historians was that the controversy of the national history standards. After this was the so-called culture wars during the administrations of George H.W. Bush. Dick Cheney's wife, Lynn Cheney, who was then chairperson of the National Endowment for the Humanities, attacked the national history standards as being un-American because they pointed out some of the injustices in the past, such as slavery, segregation, the destruction of the culture of Native Americans, and the struggle of women for equal rights. The kind of history she wanted promoted patriotism and took the critical out of critical thinking. The Republican governor of New Jersey at the time was Thomas Kean, who actually had a degree in history. Nevertheless, under his administration, the budget for the New Jersey Council for the Arts was increased to more than 10 times the budget of either the New Jersey Historical Commission or the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. This was not the case on the national level, however, where there was more parity between the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. However, we were not eligible to apply to these national endowments. Nevertheless, the then executive director of the New Jersey Historical Commission, Bernie Bush, who believed in the project and was a savvy student of state politics, had cultivated a man named Fred Wertheimer, not the Fred Wertheimer who was the head of the national government watchdog Common Cause, but who was the aide of the chairman of the Legislative Finance Committee in the state of New Jersey. Wertheimer was able to obtain an initial grant of $150,000 to jumpstart the project. While the bill made its way through the state legislature, it was not signed by Governor Kean, whose administration was about to be replaced by the newly elected Democrat Jim Florio. Again, political connections made the difference. It turned out that Frank Esposito, a historian at Kean University, was a friend of Governor Kean. he made a call to Governor Kane, who was on his way to Governor Florio's inauguration, and he signed the bill in his car. Once the project was underway, there were differences of opinion among educators who were asked to be on an advisory board about the approach we should take. Some suggested that the only approach that would work with high schools was to do scripted reenactments. I was opposed to this because I thought such docudramas never came across as authentic. It was more historical fiction than documentary history. I was pleased when Ken Burns proved that having professional actors read from primary source documents could work. Others argued that the programs had to be only a half hour in length so as to easily fit into the class period. This presented a problem because of the limited funding in producing the first 3 documentaries, because we needed to script on-camera appearances of the historians to keep the cost of editing long interviews under control and to fit as much information as possible into a half hour. As a result of this compromise, the programs turned out to be more concentrated and stilted than I had wished. Still, others suggested that we needed to redraw all the maps to make them simpler. Again, I objected by maintaining that part of the critical analysis of primary sources was to interpret their meaning. For example, one of the lessons we produced was to interpret 2 maps of the 17th century, 2 maps from the 17th century, one map of New Netherland and another of East and West New Jersey after the English conquest. The former had Indian and Dutch names, and the landforms differed drastically from the modern maps. The second was in English and showed land divisions and even some early roads. In the teacher's guide, the students were asked to interpret the differences between the maps in terms of the importance of the fur trade in New Netherland, the unfamiliarity with the land during the early exploration and settlement, and the development of farming, land ownership, and land transportation during the English period. The project took a number of years to complete because we would have to suspend production while we searched for additional funding for each program after the first 3. It didn't seem to help that the composer of the music for the series, Robert Sands, received a New York Emmy for his score of the first 3 programs. But finally, we were able to obtain a grant from the Dodge Foundation to complete the final 3 programs. But this grant had strings attached. The then head of the Dodge Foundation had formerly been an educational consultant. While we thought that this would be an advantage, we soon learned otherwise. David Grant was a true believer in assessment. He had traveled around the country promoting what he called a culture of assessment. This paradigm, which came from the business world, might better be called a cult. According to Grant, anything that was worth doing must have an assessment component from the beginning, and this assessment had to be suitable for statistical measurement. This paradigm was to become widespread throughout educational institutions and was embodied in the first decade of the 21st century by George W. Bush's No Child Left Behind. However, this kind of assessment was impossible for our project, which was to be broadcast on television and then provided to schools on videotapes sold by NJN's video distribution system. There was no budget for the kind of assessment that the Dodge Foundation wanted. Not that I didn't think, nor did I think it was a good use of resources. But luckily, the Dodge Foundation was not that vigorous in demanding accountability. While we were in production, politicians began to notice our project. The new Secretary of State, under whose supervision the Historical Commission was transferred, wanted to curry favor with the First Lady, Lucinda Florio, who, in addition to being the wife of the governor, had formerly been an elementary school teacher. The Secretary of State wanted us to have Mrs. Florio narrate the history series. I was reluctant to agree to this because we were fortunate to obtain the services of Academy Award-winning actress Celeste Holm to do the voiceover narration. I also knew that my co-producer at NJN, Lou Presti, was trying to obtain funding for a children's series titled Around and About New Jersey, which was to be a series of 15-minute visits to historical sites. I suggested that the Secretary of State ask Mrs. Florio whether she would be more interested in introducing each of these elementary school programs, which of course she was. Once the word got out that the governor's wife was to introduce this series, New Jersey Network was able to obtain funding for this series. There was also a state law that required the teaching of New Jersey history, geography, and civics in the elementary school. This mandate, which antedated the high school law, was implemented primarily in the 4th grade. However, the approach used by most elementary school teachers tended to be more about state trivia, with questions like what was the state bird or the state flower, or simply labeling a map of the counties. I also wanted to promote critical thinking among elementary school students. For example, for the program about George Washington's winter encampment in Morristown, the students were to look at a simplified topographical map of New Jersey showing Morristown's fortified position between the Watchung Mountains and the British headquarters in New York and the Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia. The students were asked to analyze why Morristown was a good location for the encampment. It was interesting to see that the elementary school teachers, who tended to be younger and less experienced, tended to be more open to new approaches like this than the high school teachers. Another program was about a mural painted by the famous artist Ben Shahn in Roosevelt, New Jersey, depicting Jewish immigration to America, their work in sweatshops, the organizing of a union, and finally the planning for a better life in this town originally known as Jersey homesteads founded during the New Deal to free Jewish immigrants from city slums. The art teacher, Rita Williams, had the students draw sections of the mural and explain what it meant to them. Another teacher, Eileen Levine, conducted oral history interviews with Ben Shawn's widow, Bernarda Bryson Shawn, and with Augusta Chasen, one of the early settlers who was also the first woman firefighter in the town. In the program titled The State House Tour, it had a group of students sitting in the Senate chamber to debate the proposal called the No Homework Bill. However, the students voted it down, and we had to fix the vote in order to send it to the governor for signing in the governor's outer office. An accompanying map lesson had the students compare a map of the counties to legislative districts and asking them to explain why the two were different sizes and shapes. The map, which was developed by the New Jersey legislature, is interactive. And if the students were to click on their election district, they would get the names and contact information of their state senators and General Assembly men and women. Other programs in the series included visits to Thomas Edison's National Historic Site in Orange, New Jersey, the Howe Living History Farm Museum in Titusville, New Jersey, the Great Falls Historic District, now a national park, in Paterson, New Jersey, the Still family reunion, an African-American family involved in the Underground Railroad. The height of political correctness occurred in the program we did about the recreated Lenape Indian village constructed by John Kraft, the son of the Seton Hall University archaeologist Herbert Kraft. John based the reconstruction and interpretation on his father's research. However, we were told by elementary school teachers that they were unwilling to use the program because it used the word Indian rather than Native American. This was despite the fact that the descendants of the Lenape Indians living in Oklahoma and Wisconsin refer to themselves as Indians. It became clear to me that the only way to promote the teaching of New Jersey history in the schools was to influence the content of the New Jersey core curriculum standards. However, when I looked at the 1996 social studies standards, I saw that they had little or no content. Instead, there were some general themes and skills that were supposed to be taught at each grade level. There was little or no New Jersey history beyond the fourth grade. I decided to contact John Doherty, who was the social studies coordinator at the New Jersey Department of Education, and offered to write an appendix to their framework with topics and resources for teaching New Jersey history. The Department of Education ended in including it on their website, as did the New Jersey Historical Commission. Then in January 2001, the National Governors Association, the Council of Chief School Officers, the National Association of State, the National Association of State Boards of Education, and the National Conference of State Legislatures, as well as the Education Commission of the states, sponsored a workshop to critique the 2009 New Jersey Social Studies standards in preparation for a legally required revision. John Doherty invited me to participate in the workshop. The workshops were organized around the benchmark of what was considered best practices in the states. The benchmark divided social studies into different disciplines: world history, American history, civics, geography, and economics. The following summer, I was invited to participate in the working team that was to revise the 1996 New Jersey Social Studies standards. I was soon to learn that there was a major schism between social studies and history teachers. The social studies teachers wanted to emphasize civics and current events using a topical approach, and the history teachers wanted to use a chronological approach using history as the core discipline within which to teach politics, economics, and geography. In addition, there was a disagreement over whether world history or Western civilization should be taught. The argument often took the form of there being too little time in the school day to teach a chronological as opposed to a topical approach. The division between social studies and history can be traced back to the progressive education philosopher John Dewey in the early decades of the 20th century. Dewey wanted to develop an educational philosophy for the masses, as opposed to the 19th century curriculum for elites that stressed the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, in the elementary schools, and a classical curriculum, Latin, natural science, and history, in the high schools. Instead, Dewey argued for a closer relationship between schools and society. Associated with this pragmatic approach to education, Dewey argued that all education must be experience-based. Quote, anything which can be called a study, whether arithmetic, history, geography, or one of the natural sciences, must be derived from materials which at the outset fall within the scope of ordinary life experience. In this respect, newer educational contrasts sharply with procedures which start with facts and truths that are outside the range of experience of those taught, and which therefore have the problem of discovering ways and means of bringing them within experience, unquote. This has led to the approach of social studies teachers that current events were the best way to engage students. However, without an understanding of the past, it's almost impossible to understand events in the present. Dewey was also a proponent of what he called, quote-unquote, moral education. He wrote that, quote, discipline, natural development, culture, social efficiency are moral traits, marks of a person who is a worthy member of that society which is in the business of education to further, quote, unquote. Furthermore, he maintained that the purpose of progressive education was to prepare students presumably the students of immigrants, to become citizens in a democracy. Like many progressives, Dewey saw this as particularly important to the children of immigrants. Thus, progressive education will result in a society that will be less susceptible to revolutionary movements. Quote, such a society must have a type of education that gives individuals personal interest in social relationships and control, and the habits of mind which secure social changes without introducing disorder, unquote. The typical social studies teacher in New Jersey tended to be a coach who had a special interest in military history and saw history as a means of teaching patriotism. Often, these social studies teachers then went into school administration and became high school principals and superintendents of school districts. The social studies approach not only became widespread in public schools, but it was especially difficult to change because of the influence held by school administrators. As a result, there were shocking indicators that many high school students didn't even know in which century the American Revolution was fought or who were the belligerents in the Civil War. The division resulted in a split in 1993 within the New Jersey Council of Social Studies, in which a group of history teachers resigned and formed a state chapter of the National Council for History Education. Given this division, I suggested to John Doherty that the work teams to revise the 1996 standards be divided into disciplines in the same manner as the evaluation done the previous year. This resulted in those teachers who favored social studies approach joining the committees working on civics, economics, and geography standards, while those who favored a chronological approach joined the committees working on world history and American history standards. I also proposed that there be a special committee formed to develop a New Jersey history standard. When the committee reports were made public, there was loud reaction to the new social studies standards. Critics argued that they were too specific because they mentioned the names of men and women of importance in world history, American history, and New Jersey history whom students should know. The New Jersey Department of Education took out all the names of individuals. Then the Washington Times, a conservative newspaper, published a story that the New Jersey Department of Education had taken out the founding fathers out of the American history standards. The New Jersey Department of Education correctly corrected this by inserting back the names of the founding fathers, but leaving out the names of significant African Americans, Native Americans, immigrants, and women. Because of this, it wasn't until 2004, well after the revised language, math, and science revisions were approved, that the New Jersey social studies standards were approved. In fact, it was only as a result of the lobbying effort by the New Jersey chapter on the national history of the National Council of History Education and a vice chairperson in the State Board of Education who was receptive to the idea that history wasn't taught properly in the public schools. However, when the 2004 social studies standards were published, the New Jersey history standard was folded into the American history standard. This seemed to be a logical revision given the fact that the state law required New Jersey history to be incorporated into the two-year course in American history. However, the fact of the matter was that much of the New Jersey history content was omitted. Nevertheless, teachers complained they didn't know how to integrate the different disciplines into one curriculum, even though that was what the local curriculum committees were supposed to do. So when the 2004 Social Standards Committee standards were revised in 2009, they were organized in a way to integrate American history, world and global history, economics, civics, and geography into a chronological framework. This is important to note that throughout the entire process of the developing of the content standards, the New Jersey business community was represented while the Higher Education Committee was not. This is a reflection of the fact that today most public officials see education as a training for workforce, not education of a knowledgeable electorate, which was the original idea behind public education from Thomas Jefferson to John Dewey. It is no accident that the business model of accountability has become the cult of quantitative assessment in education. Despite the struggle to improve the teaching of history in the schools, the issue became moot when George W. Bush's administration passed its No Child Left Behind legislation in 2001. The legislation mandated quantitative assessment in language arts, math, and science, but not in history or social studies. The emphasis on assessment, while it came out of the imposition of the business model for education, resulted in those disciplines that were not tested being relegated to a secondary importance. That is no longer part of the core curriculum. Not only were the schools being pressured to improve their test scores by teaching to the test and putting more resources into those areas that were tested, but was forcing those disciplines such as history, whose purpose was to teach critical thinking, to abandon creative approaches in favor of a fact-based, easily tested approach. Nowhere was this more clearly seen than in the rise of advanced placement courses in high schools. With the connivance of the Educational Testing Service and universities, the college admissions officers who have put out the word that in order to admit it to many colleges and universities, high school students needed to take as many AP courses as possible. Standardized AP courses are taking up more of the limited secondary education resources. Parents are encouraged to support these courses under the guise that they will count for college credit, thereby lowering the cost of the four-year college expenses. However, these courses are not really college level, if only because they are taught by high school teachers, who in the case of social studies may not have even majored in history. So as a result, school districts end up rationing special education resources that should be used instead to address the achievement gap between white and minority students. The negative effect of this cult of assessment is rampant in public history today and can be seen in the last history education project that I was involved in. In 2001, the U.S. Department of Education initiated its Teaching American History grant program to promote the training of teachers to raise student achievement by improving teachers' knowledge and understanding of and for appreciating traditional history. Grants will be awarded in partnership with entities that have content expertise to develop, document, and evaluate and disseminate innovative and cohesive models of professional education. Mark Mappin, then the executive director of the New Jersey Historical Commission, suggested that I contact Alan Lucibello, the social studies supervisor at the Montville Township School District and a former president of the New Jersey chapter of the National Council for History Education, to collaborate on a grant proposal. With the crucial assistance of Dr. Tufik Hakim, the head of grants and offices, the grants office at Kane University in Union, New Jersey, we wrote a successful grant for $1 million over 3 years for what became known as the New Jersey History Partnership Project. With the grant funds, we were able to hire Dr. Ann Pfau, who earned a PhD in American history from Rutgers University, as the project co-director, and Louise Michaels, a web designer, and Ralph Green, a talented photographer and web developer. The project consisted of 3 summer teacher seminars on 3 topics that integrated New Jersey history into U.S. history, That is, the topics were the American Revolution, the Market Revolution, and the Progressive Era. The teachers were paid a stipend to hear lectures from renowned historians, the likes of Carl Prince of New York University, Sheila Scamp of the University of Mississippi, Gregory Dowd of the University of Michigan on the Delaware Indians, Graham Hodges of Colgate University on African Americans and the American Revolution, Gene Sutherland of Lehigh University on the Quakers and the American Revolution, John Withun of the Smithsonian Institution on the Camden and Amboy Railroad, Peter Wacker at Rutgers University on the Supreme Court case of Gibbons v. Ogden, and Don Skemmer of Princeton University on painting and business records of the David Alling Chair Factory in Newark, as well as John Milton Cooper of the University of Wisconsin on Woodrow Wilson as the governor of New Jersey, and Delight Dodick on the Women's History Project on women's suffrage movement in New Jersey, as well as Paul Israel of the Thomas Edison papers at Rutgers on Thomas Edison and mass entertainment. In the afternoon workshops, the teachers broke into small groups to develop sample lessons based on the lectures and primary source material. In order to preserve and expand the reach of the public seminars, the lectures and revised lesson plans were incorporated into a multimedia interactive website on the State of New Jersey server. In addition, the website was to introduce video segments from the New Jersey Legacy series, 360-degree panoramic views of historic sites, virtual tours, and interactive exercises. One of the interactive exercises is a tour of the three-tiered Patterson Raceway system, on which you can trace the industrial history from water power to steam power to electric power. It includes a spectacular 360-degree view of the Passaic Falls, and with the statue of Alexander Hamilton, who was the founder of the Society for Useful Manufacturers in Patterson. In another interactive tour, one travels along the Morris Canal, clicking on stops along the route to see historic views and learn what products were shipped to and from that location. One interactive exercise was What Would You Do? George Washington, Howe, and Cornwallis and the New Jersey Campaign, in which students follow on a historic map from the period the strategic decisions made by each side by Washington's surrender at Fort Lee to his retreat through New Jersey to his surprise attacks on Trenton and New Princeton and his decision to go into winter quarters on Morristown. Another interactive exercise was to advise Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton about how to organize the Society for Useful Manufacturers in Patterson, New Jersey. Questions included where to locate the manufacturing center, what kinds of power to provide for the factories, and who should be employed to work in the factories, what products should they manufacture, and how should they finance the project. There was also an interactive exercise titled Alice Paul's Attic. Alice Paul was a women's suffrage advocate who was born in Morristown, New Jersey, and brought up as a Quaker. On a trip to London, she came in contact with the women's suffrage movement there, and she returned to the United States to employ the same tactics that she learned in England, namely civil disobedience and hunger strikes. During World War I, she organized picketing of the White House until President Woodrow Wilson was embarrassed into endorsing the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, giving the women the right to vote. The plan was to apply for another 3-year grant to include 3 more periods in New Jersey and American history. However, by this time, the U.S. Department of Education was under pressure to prove the effectiveness of the Teaching American History grant program by requiring quantitative assessments. As much as 1/3 of the budgets had to be dedicated to assessment, and a situation developed in which private organizations were being awarded teaching American history grants within a single state using a formula emphasizing private educational consultants. In other words, the original purpose of the content-driven Teaching American History program to promote the vaguely defined term traditional history was being undermined by the culture of assessment. Never to say the New Jersey History Project did not fit into the mold. The grant renewal for application was rejected and the project was disbanded. However, the website remained online and the CD sets with printed teacher's guides were sent to every public middle and high school in the state. However, now the Teaching American History Project is defunct, not only because of because of the lack of funding. Despite the fact that the New Jersey History Project was disbanded and its talented staff went on to other projects in other places, the New Jersey Historical Commission decided to use its share of the indirect costs to develop an interactive website for the elementary school students. Ralph Green again was hired to design and develop the site using video clips from around and about New Jersey and several of the folklife films produced by the New Jersey Historical Commission and New Jersey Network. Ralph and I came up with the characters of an African-American boy named Corey and a Hispanic girl named Gabriella to introduce each segment of the website, which was geared to the law requiring the teaching of New Jersey history, civics, and geography in the elementary schools. Ralph came up with the idea of introducing a New Jersey history postcards, and John Pizzarelli gave us permission to use his jazz rendition of the song I Love Jersey Best. One of the interactive features in the website is for students to drag along their cursors along the New Jersey map that traces the 3 routes of the Underground Railroad through New Jersey, based on an actual 1898 account written by someone who interviewed people in that develop. It's somewhat ironic that this site became even more popular than the larger New Jersey History Partnership site. The fact that these projects were preserved thanks to the internet was fortunate because under the current administration of the Republican Governor Chris Christie, New Jersey Network was sold. Actually, he's no longer the current governor. Was sold to New Jersey and to WNET Channel 13, which was assigned to Newark, New Jersey, but was actually based in New York City. The talented staff of NJN was fired with little other than public affairs program being produced there. Further, the staff of the New Jersey Historical Commission was introduced through attrition to a skeleton. However, it has undergone a rebirth under its current director, Sarah Curitin, but it no longer conducts documentary projects and instead focuses primarily on providing grants to historical societies. On the national level, the American Folklife Center of the Library of Congress no longer conducts documentary folklife projects. Like the New Deal documentary projects that inspired them, these public history and folklife programs have themselves become history. In conclusion, notwithstanding the success of the New Jersey History website, the bulk of these innovative approach to teaching U.S. history through state history were made irrelevant by the cult of assessment, which required the standardization of curriculum across the country. Under No Child Left Behind at the high school level, no longer part of the core curriculum, history was no longer part of the curriculum because if it's not tested, it is not given resources. The Obama administration made reforms to No Child Left Behind, but in its Race to the Top program, still an emphasis on accountability based on standardized tests. The only area where history is taken serious is advanced placement courses, but these are based on standardized tests and are taught by secondary school teachers, some who may not have even majored in history. Thus, there is an incentive to teach to the test. The test does make use of some primary sources, but it uses easily quantified multiple choice questions to interpret them. It also uses short essay questions, but it is not the same as writing a research paper. If high school students want to get college credit in history, they should be allowed to take courses at the local community colleges taught by qualified historians. Then more resources can be put into special education courses to reduce the achievement gap in high schools. The reason why students should study history is to make them critical thinkers with an understanding of the difference between fact and fiction, between primary sources and secondary sources, and of the complexity of local, state, national, and world issues. But this has been replaced by easily emphasized, quantified subjects such as reading, math, and science. And if it's not tested, it's not emphasized. Thus, history is no longer part of the core curriculum in American public schools. No wonder the teaching of history has been relegated to the dustbin.